All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ come upon you!
This is my boomstick.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Good evening and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts.
I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I'm David Ulloa. And we are back after a pretty long hiatus. It was pretty much all of March that we were out.
Life has been lifing, you know.
It has, yeah.
But you know, honestly, there were parts of my brain that needed a slight break after 3 Eggers movies in a row. You know, like the critical thinking part and mainly that part. But there were a couple other parts that needed a rest too. So, you know, we're back now, and that's what's important.
Intense. Yes, we are back, feeling refreshed mostly, and ready to continue mostly. And the one thing I do know is that I am so excited to talk about this movie. So we are talking about the 2006 80s slasher throwback Hatchet.
Yeah.
And this is an episode that it goes all the way back to the very beginnings of Shiver back in 2014 or 2015. I can't remember quite exactly when it was that we started Shiver, but this was a very, very early pick. I want to say it was like maybe the 5th or the 6th episode that we did.
This feels like a Jeff pick. Was it a Jeff pick?
It was most definitely a Jeff pick. And I remember the very first moment where I was like, I'm fucking in, man. I get it. I get what they're doing. I'm all here for it. And something in my brain just didn't jive with the whole movie. But I was like, man, this is so cool. So when you threw out the idea of doing Hatchet, immediately I was like, you know what? So many years have passed. I haven't seen this movie since. It's time for me to revisit Hatchet. It's time for Shiver to re-rank Hatchet. And I think we've got better rating systems now.
I think so.
Yeah. So 100%, this is something that needs to be talked about. And once again, we are going to talk about a movie in which Robert Englund is in it. And it's not A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Right. Kane Hodder is in it. And it's not Friday the 13th.
Yeah. However, we have done Friday the 13th before.
That is true.
But we have only done Nightmare on Elm Street 2 with Ish. So
right.
So we have to we definitely have to get to that. But let's get to this right now. So you threw out Hatchet, right? What is it about Hatchet that brings you back to it?
So just for, if you've been keeping up, we've been gone for a little bit. This episode was originally supposed to air or record the day after Mardi Gras. So that was the first thing I thought of was Tony Todd,
you're right.
in his in his voodoo shop. That's why we picked this one, because I was like, I the first thought I had was like, what was that movie where Tony Todd was in New Orleans, right? And you start Googling, it's like, oh my God, it was Hatchet. This movie harkens back for me. I know a lot of times we talk about the blockbuster. Obviously not that. This is 2006. This one for me goes back to when Netflix first started streaming. So when you could still get the DVDs in the mail and the streaming was still like a novel concept. When that first happened, Netflix had so much B horror because apparently you can just swap it up, just mop it up in droves for cheap. So that's what they were doing to pad their catalog. And I was in heaven. And this is something that I just randomly came across. And so when presented with the opportunity to see it again, I was like, oh my God, yes, it has been so long since I've seen Hatchet. This movie it's so many things while really just being the one thing, right? It's a slasher film through and through, right? That's its one thing, but it's nostalgic and it is fun. It's super goofy. It's really poorly written. Like there's a lot of
But it's poorly written in the way that you want it to be poorly written.
correct.
Yeah, it is very self-aware.
It is the right type of poorly written. This is the type of movie where you've got to be able to have a mindset like we do of what is this movie trying to give me and did it succeed in that? It is a ridiculous amount of fun to watch. It creates a really good lore around a new slasher, which, it had been a long time gotten a long-lasting slasher. Ghostface was years before this, a full decade. The Ghostface happened before this. And even though not nearly as kind of just everywhere as Ghostface has become, Victor Crowley, he kind of, he developed his own thing. So this movie did a lot on a budget of, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say probably about $23.50, right?
That Loch Ness monster.
It's just fun. This is a movie that feels like I would have stumbled across it on late night TNT when I was a teenager and fallen in love. This is a movie that makes you remember why if you fell in love with horror movies in the 90s, the 80s, this is a movie that reminds you of why you fell in love with horror movies in the 80s. It's got boobs, it's got blood, it's got jokes. It's fun to watch.
Fun to watch, I think, is the perfect way of describing this movie. It is a love letter to 80s horror. And there's movies that do this, and the other one that comes to mind is Final Girls.
Right.
It is totally an homage. It's totally a love letter to those 80s slashers that we love. And this one doesn't try to do anything else other than just be that. And it does it in a way where it's not aping on those movies. It is definitely forging its own thing, but it's doing it in that 80s style, where I think Final Girls tried to do something in its own particular idiom, and I think it did it really, really well. I'll never stop talking about how good Final Girls is. But this movie, if you throw this in to a marathon where you're watching stuff like Friday the 13th, and you're watching stuff like Maniac, and you're watching stuff like The Prowler, like this fits right in there. It is such a perfect throwback. And I'm going to keep using that term throughout the whole night, because throwback, I think, really is the best way to describe this movie. I'm so glad that we did this again, because I don't think I understood that when I first did this. For as smart as I think I am very often much dumber than that. and somehow I didn't get that the first time I saw this. And so I'm going to eat my words, because I don't remember what I rated this movie the last time, but I can tell you it's going to be higher. It's going to be much, much higher.
Yeah, well, one of the things about this movie that's so much fun and really harkens back to a lot of those things is how absolutely easy it would be to just dunk on this film for some of the stupid things if you aren't in on the joke. Right. So let's get into the story. Let's talk about that joke and how they pulled us in a section we're calling Bebopping Through the Bayou. I mean, take us through the moments, the things that happened in the story of this movie that made it feel like we could have been watching it in a theater in 1987.
It starts with the fact that the setting is great. One of the best things about slasher movies is the seclusion. You have to be away from the hustle and bustle for a slasher to work. So whether you're locked in a house, away from the rest of society, that could be a sorority house. It could be like
A
a big
cabin in the
scary
woods.
house, a cabin in the woods, right? Or a summer camp. Like there's all sorts of places where we feel alone, where we feel like help won't come for us. And this does that perfectly because it sets up the whole New Orleans, Louisiana thing and very quickly shifts from the debauchery of Mardi Gras to, hey, now we're taking a bayou tour. And that is perfect. They don't spend an awful lot of time in that setup. They don't really give us anything other than like, hey, here's Victor Crowley, right?
Right.
There's a legend, there's a, there's all of this. And that in itself, the legend thing, man, that is so damn good and so reminiscent of classic slashers. There's one that the name escapes me now. But it's about like a what is this? A New Jersey one. Fuck, I can't remember now. It's got this great poster, the guy holding the axe down on the floor. While you're talking, I'm gonna look it up.
Right.
But it's like it reminded me exactly of that. And it's so great because it's pulling from all of these different movies, and we're never even really given characters. The only thing we're given is stereotypes.
Oh yeah,
which
absolutely.
which is in itself problematic, yes, but can you have fun in problematic situations? I think you can, and I think that we do in this movie because you don't really need character development in these
Right.
movies. What you need is excitement, and you get lots of that from the sleazy what is this, a Girls Gone Wild type of guy,
Oh yeah.
to the two actresses that are each in totally different places. One is an artist and the other one is just there for a good time. Every side story is interesting, not good,
Right.
but it is interesting. And it feels like the kind of story that would have existed in an 80s slasher movie. To
Right.
me,
Well,
that authenticity is so important.
well, and I always think back to there's Chuck Klosterman one time was writing about the show The Real World. And he talked about how when The Real World started, they were actually just casting people, and then they just kind of lived in, and they created these roles. But we eventually reached a point in the lifetime of The Real World where you were cast to be one of those iconic roles that had
Right.
now started to be part of the real world house. With this movie coming out in 2006, yeah, is it problematic that they're just, they're just stereotypes? Yes and no, right? Because if that is what we're supposed to be doing, is we're supposed to be making this feel like an 80s slasher, then that's what you've got to do. You've got to be like, okay, well, who's going to be that guy? Who's going to be the tall, nerdy guy? Who's going to be the slutty one? Who's going to be the one who's really attractive but smart? Who's the one with the dark past? You had to throw all these things in there because that's what we've come to know. This movie is formulaic, and I'm not going to say to a fault. I'm going to say to perfection. This movie, what they built for us here was just the idea of, man, what if people were still making movies like this? Because we got a bunch of money and we're going to do that. And so I really loved the way they did that. And when we talk characters, there's a couple of them that just absolutely dominated that.
Yeah.
I love that you mentioned how good the setting was here, because it really, when you have people who visit New Orleans and all they do is go into New Orleans, hit the French Quarter, and leave, people don't realize how fucking close they are to just backwoods nonsense. Like it's not like an absurd distortion of time thing that they just jumped in a car and went on a bayou tour on a whim. That shit happens. You're right next to all the just Cajun ass nonsense that happens in the bayou. I almost caught myself using a phrase there that might be problematic, so I stopped myself there if you were wondering why I stuttered. I have a lot of friends from Louisiana, and there's a phrase there. If you know what I'm talking about, feel free to just say it to yourself right now. But I stopped myself. But people don't understand that you're really that close to all of this. Like when you're New Orleans is one of those places where when you're in it, it's very much its own entity. When you're in New Orleans, nothing outside of New Orleans exists or matters. It's a weird. It's the Southeast version of Vegas and Florence and just all these debaucherous places that have well-earned reputations.
And yet somehow feels entirely foreign too.
Right.
Because of how ancient that city is, relatively speaking, at least for the
America.
United States.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is wild because you go through parts of that city and you're like, where the fuck am I?
Yeah,
this is not America. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the setting, absolutely perfect. As I was reading about, we've had a couple weeks there. So every week I'm just like, oh, let me read a little bit more about it. Before they even had written this movie, they just had the idea for Victor Crowley. The writer director was like, I'm going to film a teaser for this and I'm going to do that shit in New Orleans. So then if the teaser takes off, I have to make the movie in New Orleans. And so they made a teaser for this before there was even a script, just to build hype and try to get the funding to do it. So beautiful first step there. As you move forward, you create a new villain. You give him a tragic backstory. You give us a reason, right? Because what you have these slashers, and some of them, they've got to have a reason why they're doing it, even if what they're doing is ridiculous. And even if that reason is not a good one, like revenge on, regular people, you have to have some sort of reasoning. They establish all that. Boom, boom, boom. And they give it to us all in nice digestible chunks. And they're like, and now we're not going to do shit but tear people apart for another 45 minutes. And you're like, fuck yeah. There's
I'm on board.
Yeah, there's no other words to describe the second half of this movie except for like, yeah, fuck yeah. That's it. Like my roommate and I are sitting there watching it probably 100 times between the two of us. Just like everything that happens is formulaic but unpredictable. And I love that. It's how you take something old and make it feel fresh and new. And they did a great job with that. There are some amazing kills in this. There are some.
Yes, there are. The special effects are outstanding.
That is where that budget of $23.50 that I suggested earlier, $18.50 of it was special effects. The rest was like everybody gets a hurricane a day. And, that's how we're paying you. Maybe it makes some money. You'll see some on the back end. Right. So it does so many of those things so precisely and so well. And it's just, like I said, it's a good time watch. We've done so many of these movies where I say one of my favorite things is if I was at a Halloween party, I could throw this on in the background because you don't really have to pay attention. You can just look up every once in a while and enjoy it. That's this movie. You're 30 seconds in before it's like, them's titties. And then, so you got it on in the background, everybody's attention, titties go away. You're back to talking, you're laughing. Oh, there's a couple more. Good to go. Oh, we're in the swamp now. Alligator attack. Who's the bad guy? It's just enough little moments to capture that this would be a great background Halloween party movie. And I love that.
It kind of reminds me of when we've had Ralph Diaz-Wagner on. He talks about how he had a conversation with Roger Corman when he was working in Hollywood. And the Corman once told him that every 10 minutes you need either boobs or blood. And that is, I mean, when you think of the formula for slashers. That is 100% it. Roger Corman made his mark on cheap horror.
Yeah.
And for a reason, because that Roger Corman school of movie making just works. It's exciting. You talked about doing classic things in new ways in the form of like the kills and the special effects, and like you knew that there was going to be a zig, and it did zig, except that zig was a zag,
Right.
sort of thing, right? The movie I was thinking of was one called Madman, which very famously had to change its main villain, its slasher killer, because it was in production at the same time as The Burning. And The
Oh.
Burning was released like shortly before it, and featured Cropsey, the New Jersey legend, right?
Yeah.
And so like every time I watch this movie, and I've only seen it twice now, immediately what I start thinking of is Madman and The Burning. That sort of, Cropsey style legend, the backwoods legend. And there's plenty of movies like that, because you go back to The Hills Have Eyes, and that's totally that.
Yeah.
You go back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it's totally that. But there's a really unique way that 80s slashers, and particularly Madman and The Burning, had in presenting this backwoods killer, I think, in a way that the second Friday the 13th did as well. Because by the time the third one came around, they were creating Jason at that point. But in that second one, Jason kind of just was another Cropsey, just a dude with a sack on his head. I fucking love that. That's part of the reason why I love that second Friday the 13th so much, because what we have is a Victor Crowley. But the great thing is that Victor Crowley is coming with 30 years of slasher history before him. And so they know exactly what it is that they need to do here. In fact, fucking Kane Hodder is playing him, man. Jason Voorhees himself is playing Victor Crowley. And it is spectacular. I love the fact that there's nothing to this. I do love the fact that if you want there to be a story, if you do want to pay attention, everyone's got their thing. There's the tall nerdy guy, like you said, who's got this whole side story with his girlfriend, that she broke up with him and he needs to find a girl, but he doesn't want to find a girl. The best friend, who I love the fact that the black guy's not the first one to die.
Right.
Thank you for bucking that trend. Thank you for making him a smart and funny and reliable character. Like, there's so many things that you think, oh, okay, well, it's just going to do what every other horror movie does, and it doesn't actually do that. It does zag more than you think it's going to zig. The best story, though, is the story of I'm forgetting the character's name. Jenna's story. Is it Jenna? Mary Beth.
Oh, the one whose brother and dad are at the beginning.
Right. Yeah. Her story is actually a good one. And I think it's a lot of fun to see that story develop, because she's constantly between the I want revenge and I want to survive.
Yeah.
And that inner turmoil, which granted doesn't give you much. There's not a lot of play there. And it's not like she's doing some sort of crazy character exploration either, but it does allow for really great situations. And that's really what this movie is a collection of really great situations.
Yeah, this movie is very much, it's one set piece to another, right? If this were if this were a wrestling match, this would be referred to as a spot monkey match, right? Where you're just getting from one big awe-inspiring thing to the next. What's in between doesn't matter. That's absolutely what happens here. But it's one where the payoff is so good when you get to those that doesn't bother you. This movie, and again, I did look it up, and it is $1.5 million. So plenty of money for you and I who just teach and have a family, but for making a movie, it's peanuts. So one of my favorite things throughout this movie that was obviously like a money saving thing was there was this one scene of blood splattering on a tree that they just kept playing like every time somebody got killed, regardless of whether or not the method in which they got killed would involve blood flying out of them in such a way, or whether or not there was a tree anywhere around. They just kept using this one scene of what was obviously a slow-mo of a bucket off camera just throwing a big splatter of blood on a tree. And again, that's the type of thing that you look at and you're like, oh God, that's so funny. Like, that's so good. It's so great that they're doing stuff like that because, in the 70s and 80s, when, these things were popping up all over the place, they were all doing it with no budget. And so that's the type of stuff that you would see. You would see scenes getting reused because once you filmed it once, you can just keep splicing it into different places. Yeah. So they had a great time with that. They had a really good time with the I've said it. So I mean, we can just talk about some of the kills in this movie they just get to be so much fun.
They are good
and so really, damn really creative. But man, you want to talk about special effects. That scene where he just grabs the woman's mouth and just rips, and you get that great like Michael Bay big swinging crane around it as it happens. So you start off on one side of her jaw and you see that lip start to rip, and then you end up in front of her and you see just how far he's pulled her jaw apart, and then it spins all the way over and you just kind of see the aftermath of it. Holy shit.
It's amazing. That is a legitimately amazing kill. And the special effect, it's really well lit. They're smart in placing this movie in the middle of the swamp where all you have is natural moonlight. And anyone who's been camping knows that moonlight is plenty of light if you need it to be.
Right.
But if you want to showcase a special effect and you don't have much money, in fact, all you have is 23 fitty, then that's the perfect situation for which to design these special effects, because you just need to make it convincing enough. And you're using camera movement and special like sound effects to really sell it. Man, it is fucking awesome.
Yeah, this is the third or fourth time I've seen this movie, but it's been a while. And that one, I had not forgotten about that kill, but I had forgotten how graphic that particular kill is. And so, I mean, and that's where they start. They're like, that's one of the first kills in the movie. And so then they just go for it from them. We get a really great head twisting, and I mean, just basically pops this dude right off his spine. We get a couple that happen off camera, which lead to funny moments, like the one girl's body parts just getting thrown at Ben. Like she's supposed to be the lookout, and then you just see her body parts start flying at Ben as he realizes what's happening. And again, you know what? I'm fine with the fact that I didn't get to see that kill because it led to a really funny moment.
Right.
And so there's a give and take to that, right? When we did the new Candyman, we kind of shit all over it for the fact that they wouldn't show us the kills, but that's because they weren't showing them to us, and then just there was no payoff.
There was no payoff.
If you're not going to show it to me, give me a funny way of finding out how it happened. And that's what they did here. It was, the idea that shooting him's not going to work, stabbing him with a pitchfork's not going to work. Oh, I know. He was supposed to die in a fire. We'll just set him on fire, and it's like, okay, that tracks. That
logic.
Tracks.
Okay, yeah.
That fucking moment where they realize they set him on fire and then it starts raining and you just get this camera pan up and it's like, oh, the roof on this shed is full of holes, because of course it is. It's just you're just watching it and you're like, yeah, that's exactly what I expected to happen. Like it like I'm surprised, but also this totally makes sense, and I either expected it to happen or I'm upset that I didn't.
I think if you're upset that it happens, which is where I was when I first saw this movie. You got to stop being such a fucking nerd. That's really that's the only argument that can be made is like those diagrams where it's like, do you need this? And it's like, if the answer is yes, then buy this thing. If the answer is no, are you sure? And then it takes you all the way back around until you're finally back to that thing, right? Like, do you like this movie? Yes, you're good. No, are you such a fucking nerd? Stop being such a fucking nerd. Like the fucking movie. That's the way it goes. You're either into horror or you're not. And if you don't try to be highbrow, don't try to be above this thing. I fought that for a long time. It doesn't matter how smart and educated you are. It doesn't matter how funny you think you are. This movie is great.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm really glad that we have waited this long since I've been on the show to do this movie or a movie like this type of caliber, because that when we first started, I was really focused on like being a fucking nerd, right? Like I was
right.
like, okay, I'm going to look at these things. I'm going to take this really seriously. There are some things that just aren't meant to be taken seriously. And Hatchet is absolutely one of those things. You've got to just sit back and be like, okay, I see what you're giving me. I'm here for it. Now we can move forward. And what you're giving me is those Corman things, right? Boobs, blood, and just enough dialogue to keep it going, which the dialogue in this movie, I said earlier, poorly written. And that was the wrong thing to say. I feel like the dialogue in this film is written badly on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a lot of the dialogue in this film, and maybe we're just enamored right now, so we're given a lot of credit. But I feel like the dialogue in this film, as they were writing it, they're like, Adam Green just be like, no one would talk like this. And then, he's sitting there next to himself and he's like, yeah, that's the point. The point is that no one would talk like this. And that keeps it from being too real. Right. Nobody says some of these things, and these things just don't happen. And that's what makes it fun. When these things get really real, or when you never get immersed in this movie, right? You're always just the dude on the couch with popcorn. You're never sucked into this one, but that's part of the fun, because there is like a weird disconnect between the way that the people talk in the movie and the way that a normal human being would converse with another. And I've got to believe that was done on purpose to add to what this movie is giving us.
Yeah, because it's real in the slasher movie sense.
Exactly.
It's exactly the way that a real person in a real slasher movie would talk. And that's as real as I need it to be. Because if you put real people in those situations, what you end up with is a totally different kind of movie. What you end up with really is Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yes.
You end up with Scream. And Wes Craven did it perfectly. I don't think we need to revisit that anytime soon, because it was done to a degree where I just can't see it being topped.
Right.
And maybe I'm just not that creative. Maybe it's that like I don't have ideas good enough for that. And I'm sure that there are guys out there who do. But are you going to say anything new? I don't think so. Where I think this movie kind of does modernize the typical 80s slasher.
Yeah. Oh, did I lose you? Did you lose me?
Nope.
Oh,
no, I'm here. Or you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, the cat is running around like a fucking mad woman, like trying to, I don't know what the fuck she's doing. I don't know what she's playing with. I'm pretty sure she took the hat from McCready back here. I have an action figure of McCready from The Thing, and he is missing his hat. So I think she took it somewhere. But she's like darting around the house like the Dickens. It's crazy.
So you were saying that there was something that modernized the 80s slasher.
Yeah, this movie like modernized the 80s slasher. It made it fresh and current for this new generation. And that is something that it's timeless in a way. When you start thinking like they brought cell phones into it, but they removed the cell phone from the equation by putting it out in an area with no signal. It's brilliant. And you can still make it a true homage to the 80s by doing that. I mean, I would love to see one of these things set in the Everglades here in Florida. You know, spring break, do exactly the same fucking movie.
It made the same movie.
Now, just the same fucking movie, but instead of it being Victor Crowley, it's like, you know, Hector Hernandez or something, right? and it was 80s cocaine running that you know, some plane went down. The little boy saw his dad, you know, burn up in a plane crash, and now all of a sudden he haunts the Everglades, and anyone who goes out to Loop Road to go
to find the lost cocaine
stash, the Boy Scouts, they are in the Hector Hernandez land of the dead. It's I mean, there you go. You got the whole fucking movie right there. It's spring break. Miami Beach don't want you there. They keep kicking you out. So what are you going to do? You're going to take an airboat ride. Boom. Done. We got it.
So one of the things about this that really does harken back to those 80s slashers, we talked about those stereotypical roles. So in a section that we're calling tourists and locals, I mean, let's look at some of those stereotype roles. And I'm going to start this one off. And to start this one off, I need us to take a trip back. So this was 2006. If you're watching this in 2006, I need you to go back another 5 years. In 2001, there was a movie released called Not Another Teen Movie, which was one of those spoof movies that came out in that run of when they were really good. Not Another Teen Movie is fucking hilarious. Mm-hmm. And in that movie, there was a character named Malik. Malik's only dialogue was when he explained that he was supposed to be the stereotypical black friend who says things like shit, damn, and that is whack. The next time he talks, he says, damn, that shit is whack. Malik was played by one Dion Richmond, who fast forward 5 years, then just played the same role in this movie as Marcus, but he's 5 years older. He's experienced in the world. He's lived it and he's doing it. I loved Marcus in this movie because they gave us stereotypical black friend, but they didn't make him dumb. They didn't make him a background character. Yes, all of the things he said were basically just catchphrases, but they did it in a way that was a stereotype. But like you said, we're not zigging with it. We're zagging with it. We're going to twist it just this much. This is a role, you know, but a role that we are changing just a little bit. I love the scene when they're running away and Marcus has climbed up in the tree and he's just sitting there and he's contemplating whether or not he can just survive in this tree forever. and they're like, well, can you see city lights or anything? And he says, yeah, that way, but they're really far away and I'm safe up here. Just little shit like that, where it's, they made him smart. They made him funny. He was just the guy who thought he was going to get a stereotypical dude's trip to New Orleans. They were going to hit some strip clubs. They were going to get drunk. They were going to look at some boobs. And then that was it. They were just going to keep going. He got sucked into this by his lovesick, heartbroken friend. And he's pissed off, and rightfully so. You know, he wanted to have a good time on Bourbon Street. He tried to do right by his friend. And everything then went wrong for him. But I love the fact that this was Dion Richmond, like I said, and it was like an evolved version of that Not Another Teen Movie character. What's also really funny is when you go back through his filmography, you end up finding all of these films where he's just always kind of played that same role. He was in Van Wilder with the same role. He was in High Frequency, same type of role, right? He did all of these things. So then for them to be like, we've got this idea for one, but you're not going to be just a set piece. Like, you're going to be as fleshed out as anybody is. And I think that Dion Richmond did a great job of delivering partially stereotypical Black friend and partially guy who's just trying his best to survive like everyone else. And that was a lot of fun. I really enjoy that it's him doing this role in this movie.
I don't know that anyone could have done this.
Right.
Like anyone, like what I'm saying is, like, it's
just
not
anyone.
Just anyone. Thank you. That's what I meant to say. I don't know that just anyone could have done this. And Dion Richmond is not the sort of actor that plays in Shakespeare.
Right.
But he is the sort of actor that can carry that weight. And when you've got a movie where the laughs are coming pretty much every minute, to be, in my opinion, the standout comedic force
right
in the movie, that's a testament to your ability, because quite literally everything that left his mouth was either the funniest thing that was said in that scene or the smartest thing that was said in that scene.
Yes.
And that's a tough, like, balancing act that you got to do, that you got to be the funniest guy and the smartest guy there. Everything he said made sense, whether it made you laugh or made you go, do that thing. That was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. The first person that comes to mind for me is also a racial stereotype. Perry Shen.
Perry Shen in this fucking
as
movie.
Sean is maybe the first thing that I think of when I think of Hatchet. And he was also in one of those, like, high school movies from that time. He was in The New Guy.
Yeah.
He was in The New Guy. Small role, but still, I mean, this guy, when he finally goes into his Chinese accent, I forgot that happens. And I was watching this and spit my coffee out. It went all over my computer screen. I'm surprised it's working right now. I could not control myself. I had to excuse myself from the room. Dion Richmond is the funniest consistently throughout the movie. But I think the funniest moments were with Perry Shen.
Well, and especially between the two of them interacting. Like,
yes. That is comedy gold. And I realize that we keep saying comedy and we're talking about a horror movie here. But horror and comedy go hand in hand. These things have to be married to one another, because as dark as you're going to go, and this movie goes real dark, the violence is over the top, right? You got to go in that same direction the other way. So it's like, hey, we're moving this way, but it's like we're banging against each other and we're just moving just as far apart. Wow, man, this role, maybe it's because I'm not Asian, but I think that it is one of the funniest things that I have ever seen, full stop. Not a horror movie, not a drama, not one of the funniest roles in any movie ever. I don't know if this is the opinion that I had when we did this 8 years ago.
Right.
If it wasn't, I'm a fucking moron. I don't understand how I would love to see a Perry Shen prequel.
Yeah.
Where it's just him in a similar situation. Fuck, have him do the Hector Hernandez movie here in Miami. All right.
Well, funny you should mention that, because there are 2 more Hatchet movies and then a 4th one just called Victor Crowley. And not only is Perry Shen in all of them, but he plays a different character in each one.
Oh, that's amazing.
Perry Shen is in all 4 movies in the Hatchet verse, and he plays a different dude in each one. I have only seen this one and 2. I was unaware that there was a 3 and a 4th one. So when I went and looked it up and I was just looking at cast and stuff, he is in all 4 and is listed as a different character in each one. So you kind of get that. Wow. The thing with Perry Shen's character in this is Sean, is the fact that it's code switching is very real and it's a very useful life skill, and so what we get out of Perry Shen here is somebody who is using what is most beneficial to him in that moment. And so when he's got to pretend like in that horrible New Orleans accent that he's trying to put on at the beginning, that's just so damn funny. And then you've got his actual, like Chinese accent comes through. And then you've got when they're helping carry the girls, and he looks at Marcus, and it gets very urban. He's obviously trying to use black slang and things like that to converse with Marcus. The way he effortlessly does it is impressive. They were stark moments in the movie, but it wasn't like his face ever changed or like he seemed like he was getting into another character. He just swapped these things up, and he did it really, really well. He was so funny from the very first time we see him, like I said, and he's in that voodoo shop, and he's talking about the tours. Just had a great time with him. I thought that he was really funny. So we'll switch away from some of the funny ones now, because I do want to talk about Joel David Moore as Ben, who is the ultimate early 2000s that guy.
Yes.
Joel David Moore is he's that guy. You made a comedy movie. He had a bit part, even if he was just in the background. Most famous during the time for being in probably Dodgeball, I would assume, is probably the biggest of his roles from then. And then he was eventually cast in Bones. But he is
Grandma's Boy, right?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. He's the leather jacket guy in Grandma's Boy. That's right. Shit. Yeah. And so, but as soon as he shows up, roommate and I are sitting here watching. That's exactly what he said. He goes, "Oh, it's that guy." And then he starts talking. He goes, "This is exactly what I thought he would be like in this movie that I've never seen." Like 30 seconds into seeing him, just this heartbroken, lovesick guy who wants nothing to do with the world. He doesn't care about boobs on Bourbon Street. He doesn't care about going to strip clubs. He's trying to have a cultural experience in New Orleans, which is very possible. And I love going to New Orleans for both of those things. Right. Last time I went to New Orleans. Got super drunk one night. Next day, did a cemetery tour. It's about balance.
Fantastic. Sweetie. Yes.
But he was so perfect for this because there's just something about that guy's face that just is like, man, who hurt you? Like, no matter what the role is, right? No matter what he's doing, you're just like, this poor guy. He can't catch a break. He could be playing a movie as like in Grandma's Boy. He's very successful, but the whole time it's like, this poor guy's so broken. You just
it's something in his face, and I think he knows that, and he plays with it really, really well.
Yeah, and so he did a great job. He was perfectly cheesy when he needed to be perfectly cheesy in the scenes that were obviously over the top. When the wrought iron fence piece is in his foot, and she's like, just push it forward, and he's like leaning, and it's like it's supposed to be tearing up his foot, and you just see him kind of straining, but also not. Just the whole scenario with him is just. he does such a great job of bringing this real elasticity to the character that he had there, from moving past just lovesick guy to guy who is almost the hero of it all. And I mean, when you look at Joel David Moore, doesn't he look like the guy who should just barely miss out on being the hero? Like that's like just almost the hero is going to be the Joel David Moore biopic. Yeah. Almost a hero. That's his biopic, because you look at him and you're like, this is a guy who's just always just barely going to miss the brass ring. And he was just so perfectly cast in this.
He really was, man. I'm torn about who to go with. Okay. I'm going to go with Joel Murray as Doug Shapiro. He plays such a sleaze. And the thing is, like, you look at him and he's like, he looks like your dad.
Yes.
You know, like he looks like exactly what you think your dad is going to look like. And he's another one of these guys who he's like, I know him from that movie.
Yes,
or
absolutely.
I know him from that thing, right?
Yeah, a guy who it takes like 5 swipes of the touchpad to get through his filmography, but probably his entire film presence in all of these movies adds up to less than one Lord of the Rings movie.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And he, I think his best work is, do you see Mad Men?
I have never watched Mad Men. I hear I'm missing out, but
he's got a great role on that show, and just like every other character, like it's tragic, but it's like perfect for him. He is so dirty in this movie, and when you find out that he is not actually a producer of dirty movies, it's like, I didn't think you could get worse.
Right.
It's like I thought that you were bad under the premise that you were an actual producer of this sort of smut and were exploiting these poor girls. But you're actually worse than that. And it's so perfect. It's so perfect. And I knew that this time around, going into it. And I was like, oh man, you fucking suck so much more than I think you do. It was really great.
Yeah, he was so funny. And you're right. And it's why he's been cast in so many things, because he just has that look of, he's the dude next door. You know, he's just the man next door. You see him cutting his grass every Saturday and stuff like that. He says, hey, we're having a hot one today, you know, and that's the extent of everything you ever say to this guy. He has that look, and you go back through it, and he's just been cast in that so many times. Before we move on to getting to the villain, can we just take a second to acknowledge the fact that this movie, on a $1.5 million budget, and being the first big thing that Adam Green really did, can we just talk about the fact that he got Tony Todd, Robert Englund, and Kane Hodder all in this film? Like, there had to be. I wish I could have been in a pitch meeting with this guy or something. This guy has got friends in high places. He's got the best pitch room ever, or he just gives the bang in his head that any dude out there has given. Because I'm sorry, all 3 of those guys, I'm 2 of them in bit parts, and Kane Hodder as looking like Kane Hodder in a bit part, but also is Victor Crowley. Like, how big are your balls that is what you decided you were going to try to get, man? Like, you're like, oh, got a bit parts. Guy runs Voodoo Shop. Tony Todd. Somebody get him on the phone. Like, who the fuck are you, Adam Green? And how did you pull this off?
You know what I'm thinking is, when was part 3 for Scream? Was that 2000?
Would have been right around there too. It would have been, yeah, it would have been. I think I saw it Yeah, it would have been maybe 99. Because I'm trying to think of who I feel like I went and saw. Oh, 2000. Yeah, so we're right there.
2000.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it had been 6 years really since there had been a slasher. And with the exception of that third Scream, there hadn't really been a strong slasher presence since the Scream 2 days, where you've got like the I Know What You Did Last Summer, that sort of thing. This movie kind of kickstarts that craze again. And I think when you've got guys like Robert Englund and you've got guys like Tony Todd, and you're telling them this is an homage to you, just read the script.
Right.
And they read this script and they can see it because they've done these movies before. I think that you get them for peanuts.
Right.
Because of the love of the art. And the fact that Englund plays the role the way that he does, and the fact that Tony Todd plays the role the way they usher in the movie.
Yeah.
It's Englund who kind of ushers in Victor Crowley, and then it's Tony Todd who sets the story in motion, really. And then you've got Kane Hodder. I mean, you've got Candyman, you've got Freddy Krueger, and you've got Jason Voorhees all in the same movie. I don't know how much it would have taken to financially to get them to agree, but I'm pretty sure that they would have agreed to a sit down with that script, because it really does read like a love letter to the slasher.
Yeah. So just I mean, it like I said, just absolutely incredible that he pulled off having them all in there, and they all seem to have fun with their roles. Not the least of which is Kane Hodder as Victor Crowley. So we've gotten into this habit of doing this, and it makes the most sense because when we're looking at these movies, the villain, the slasher, the monster deserves their own spot because they're ultimately what's driving it. So what is it about Hatchet or Hatchet Face or, whatever you want to call him in that moment, Victor Crowley? What is it that drew you to this character?
It's the design. And I'm not 100% certain who came up with this design, but it is worthy of Tom Savini.
Yes.
It really, truly is a classic design of a slasher villain. Like this is the sort of slasher villain that has 3 movies that come after it.
Exactly.
As we're finding out. For me, it was just iconic. And it's a movie that doesn't have the maybe in the society at large, it doesn't have that sort of weight to it, but within the horror community, people know Victor Crowley, and you see the image and you're like, yeah, that's Victor Crowley. You see the silhouette and it's a classic design that riffs off of some of these early slasher killers. Like, is it kind of ableist in a way, right? Because there's deformities, sure. But that's also part of the genre.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and there's a lot that you can say about, like, the way that it sort of treats the disabled and the handicap and all that, and all of that is true. I also think that sometimes you got to just watch a movie and disconnect.
Yep.
And if you can find yourself laughing at any one of the jokes in Airplane or Naked Gun, I think that you can disconnect enough to look at this creature and say, that's a badass design. And then the fact that you've got someone like Kane Hodder in the suit is just, or in the prosthetics, because it's not really a suit.
Right.
He has so much presence. His Jason Voorhees was never in my favorite Jason Voorhees movies.
You're talking about Kane Hodder's?
Right.
Yeah.
But he is my favorite Jason. Hands down. His presence in those movies make them better. And I think that Hatchet is kind of that same way. If it had been someone else, I don't know that it would have worked as well.
Yeah, I mean, so when you're talking about the prosthetics and stuff like this, I went and I looked it up, and it's John Carl Beaker is the guy's name, and his resume is incredible. I mean, going back to Reanimator, he did Friday the 13th, Part 7.
Reanimator. Okay.
Yeah, he did Ghoulies. He did Friday the 13th 7, Nightmare on Elm Street 4, Halloween 4, Freddy's Dead. I mean, the guy, Curse of Michael Myers. I mean, the guys. Oh, he did Ginger Dead Man. Hilarious movie. So the
I've never seen that one.
Oh, dude. Oh, Christmas. Write it down. So anyway, he's got a resume, and that really shows in this movie, because what made Victor Crowley memorable, like you said, that silhouette, the look of him, but like we talked about earlier, and this is a combination of writing and special effects, but what sets you apart, and it's the kills, right? It's how are you killing people in a way that other people haven't killed them, and if it is a way that other people have been killed before, how is it more impressive when you did it? When he's one of the very first kills, when he's hacking at Richard Ryle, and he just like starts hacking like at his shoulder, and then all of a sudden he just like splits all the way down, and he holds up like the top half of his body like this, and he's just kind of laughing. There's a maniacal nature to Victor Crowley, because we're essentially looking at this guy who's trapped in the worst day of his life, and has been for, 20, 30 years, right? It's what a lot of people would consider their own personal hell, is you get stuck in this moment, and you can never get out of it. So while the things that he does are brutal and gruesome, yeah, one, lots of practice, and two, lots of anger, right? And so we see him take that out on these people. What we see out of Victor Crowley is malice. This dude is just angry, and he's taking it out on whoever gets in front of him, whether or not it's because he sees them as those people, or he's just, people are around and people deserve to die. What we get is just anger, but he's smart, and he's tricky. If no other moment shows you how smart and an absolute maniac he is, you look at the final scene of this movie, where again, homage, they're on the boat and then he pops up on the side and pulls one off. And then what we're expecting to happen is she gets away, and they're like, and we see Ben's hand go down in the water. You're like, yeah, here it is. All right, he's going to pull her up and everything's fine. And she gets up above that water, and we get that close-up shot of Crowley just laughing. I mean, cackling, because he's used Ben's hand to pull her out of the water. That shit was so good. And it really showed an intelligence to him that we don't always get out of the slasher. A lot of times we get this superhuman kind of bulletproof thing that he'd been built as for so much of that time. But then you throw in a little bit of Freddy there, because now he's fucking with your head.
Right. There's a deviance there.
Yeah. It's like, no, it's not enough to just kill you. Like, you thought you killed me, and I wanted you to have that moment, and now I'm really gonna mess with you now. Which spoiler alert, she does get away. Mary Beth does show up in Hatchet 2. However, she's played by
Danielle Harris.
Danielle Harris. There it is. Yeah, she's played by Danielle Harris in the second one. And so, but just to end it on that note where you see it and you're like, oh God, so classic. This is so great. And then swap it up that much. Those are the moments that make Victor Crowley memorable. And it's funny when you talk Victor Crowley, you're really only going to run into like two types of people. You're going to run into horror fans who see Victor Crowley as great, right? And they're like, no, he's awesome. Like there's a discussion there for at least an honorable mention if you're doing your mountain. And then you're going to run into people who really have nothing to do with horror and maybe watch Hatchet, and they're going to think that it's just a hacky horror movie villain.
Well, I don't get it.
Exactly. And you know what? It's okay to be wrong, Group B. It really is, because Victor Crowley does everything so well. He really does. They had a lot of fun with this. And that's the other thing, is so often when Victor Crowley's doing these things to people, he looks like he's having a good time with it, which also just messes with your head. So I think that he's a fantastic slasher and movie villain. It was really great to go back and watch this and get to experience him again. And I believe all 4 of them are on Tubi right now. So my roommate are like, well, we're going to keep watching these probably.
Yeah, I am definitely going to keep this party train going. And this leaves us with just the rating. So if you are new to the show, this might be a little bit confusing, but we don't use stars. We believe that a movie should be rated only against itself and not against other movies. Rated for what it is, not for what it isn't. So even though we've mentioned all of these other slashers throughout the last hour and 7 minutes, we are only going to be rating this against itself. So Daniel and I spoke at the start of the show, before the show started, and we came up with Jawbreakers as the metric for this.
Because we've got to remember that kill. That kill deserves something like this.
It absolutely does. So Daniel, out of a possible 5 Jawbreakers, how many Jawbreakers do you give Hatchet?
The absolute beauty of the way that we do this show and the way that we rate movies is the fact that I can sit here with a straight face and 100% tell you that this is a 5 out of 5 Jawbreakers, because of the fact that I believe Adam Green delivered exactly the movie he wanted to. And I believe that everything he wanted to happen to the audience happened to the audience. I think that he wanted you to snicker at how silly the dialogue was. I think that he wanted you to kind of recoil at how gruesome it got. He wanted you to see these moments that are basically just, risographs of 80s scenes in 80s slashers. He wanted you to see those things. This is the horror fans' horror movie. This is made by a fan with love to fans who love. This is the horror movie equivalent of that meal that you have all these friends who don't understand why you love it, but you've got some emotional attachment to it from when you were a kid, and when you get sick, it's all you want. That's what this movie is.
That is the best way of putting it.
It's so great. It does all the things that we've talked about so well. And so, yeah, absolutely 5 out of 5 Jawbreakers.
And it's the same for me. This movie is perfect. And I'm going to call myself out 8 years ago and say that I'm a fucking moron. And I didn't understand this movie. I didn't get it. And I think that if you don't get it, you need to change your mindset.
Yeah, just watch it again. Just watch it again and don't be expecting anything.
Right. Or expect everything.
Right.
Expect absolutely everything, and it will still deliver. All you have to do is not be an ass.
Yeah.
Don't be an ass. All right. And you allow yourself to be open to the brutality, to the humor, to the action, the adventure. This movie, let's face it, this movie has it all.
It really does.
All right.
It
There's
really does.
there's Princess Bride. There's Casablanca. There's Raiders of the Lost Ark. And there's Hatchet.
It's rarefied
Movies that
air,
have
baby.
it all.
Rarefied
go.
air. So there you have it. A unanimous 5 out of 5 jawbreakers for Hatchet. This movie is just an absolute blast. And like we said at the very top, a love letter to the genre. So if you enjoyed it, if you didn't enjoy it, if you want to tell us why we're wrong, find a way to by heading to shiverpod.com, where you can find links to all of our social media. You can also email us at shiverpod@gmail.com. If you want to be one of the nerds who tells us why we're wrong, don't worry, we'll talk about you and probably make fun of you, but I'm sure that's why you'd be doing it anyway, right? Reach out to us on one of those social medias. I know our Instagram has been dead here for the past little bit. I do promise it's coming back. Like we said at the top, life's been lifing. You know, there's been a lot going on, and sometimes staring at my phone is just the absolute last thing I want to do on any given day. And so, but I promise you, things are on the up and up. The weather's warm. The sleeves are off. It's time to get back into this. And so make sure you follow us. We are at ShiverPod on all of your social media platforms.
Absolutely. So on behalf of all of us here at Shiver, fight you very much.